Looking back and looking around, the long history of pastoral peoples. The revolution of domestication beginning around 11,500 years ago involved both plants and animals. People living in more favored environments were able to combine farming with animal husbandry, and on this economic foundation generated powerful and impressive civilizations with substantial populations. But on those arid margins of agricultural lands, where productive farming was difficult or impossible, an alternative kind of food-producing economy emerged around 4000 BCE, focused on the raising of livestock. Peoples practicing such an economy learned to use the milk, blood, wool, hides, and meat of their animals, allowing them to occupy lands that could not support agricultural societies. Some of those animals also provided new baggage and transportation possibilities. Horses, camels, goats, sheep, cattle, yaks, and reindeer were the primary animals that separately, or in some combination, enabled the construction of pastoral or herding societies. Such societies took shape in the vast grasslands of Inner Eurasia and Sub-Saharan Africa, in the Arabian and Saharan deserts, in the subarctic regions of the Northern Hemisphere, and in the high plateau of Tibet. Pastoralists had their greatest impact in the Afro-Eurasian world because in most parts of the Americas, the absence of large animals that could be domesticated precluded a herding economy. Only in the Andes did llamas and alpacas allow for some pastoralism. The world of pastoral societies. Despite their many differences, pastoral societies shared several important features that distinguished them from settled agricultural communities and civilizations. Pastoral societies, generally less productive economies, and their need for large grazing areas meant that they supported far smaller populations than did agricultural societies. People generally lived in small and widely scattered encampments or seasonal settlements made up of related kinfolk, rather than in the villages, towns, and cities characteristic of agrarian civilizations. Beyond the family unit, pastoral peoples organized themselves in kinship-based groups or clans that claimed a common ancestry, usually through the male line. Related clans might on occasion come together as a tribe, which could also absorb unrelated people into the community. Although their values stressed equality and individual achievement, in some pastoral societies, clans were ranked as noble or commoner, and considerable differences emerged between wealthy and aristocrats owning large flocks of animals and poor herders. Many pastoral societies held slaves as well. Furthermore, pastoral peoples generally offered women a higher status, fewer restrictions, and a greater role in public life than their counterparts in agricultural civilizations. Everywhere women were involved in productive labor as well as having domestic responsibility for food and children. The care of smaller animals, such as sheep and goats, usually fell to women, although only rarely did women own or control their own livestock. Among the Mongols, the remarriage of widows carried none of the negative connotations that it did among the Chinese, and women could initiate divorce. Mongol women frequently served as political advisors and were active in military affairs as well. A 13th century European visitor, the Franciscan friar Giovanni di Plano Carpini, recorded his impressions of Mongol women. Girls and women ride and gallop as skillfully as men. We even saw them carrying quivers and bows, and the women can ride horses for as long as the men. They have shorter stirrups, handle horses very well, and mind all the property. Mongol women make everything: skin, clothes, shoes, leggings, and everything made of leather. They drive carts and repair them. They load camels and are quick and vigorous in all their tasks. They all wear trousers, and some of them shoot just like men. Certainly, literate observers from adjacent civilizations noticed and clearly disapproved of the freedom granted to pastoral women. Ancient Greek writers thought that the pastoralists with whom they were familiar were women governed. To Han Quan, a Chinese Confucian scholar in the 1st century BCE, China's northern pastoral neighbors made no distinction between men and women. The most characteristic feature of pastoral societies was their mobility, as local environmental conditions largely dictated their patterns of movement. In some favorable regions, pastoralists maintained seasonal settlements, migrating, for instance, between highland pastures in the summer and less harsh lowland environments in the winter. Others lived more nomadic lives, moving their herds frequently in regular patterns to systematically follow the seasonal changes in vegetation and water supply. But even the most nomadic pastoralists were not homeless. They took their homes, often elaborate felt tents, with them. Whatever their patterns of movement, pastoralists shared a life based on turning grass, which people cannot eat, into usable food and energy through their animals. Although pastoralists represented an alternative to the agricultural way of life that they disdained, they were almost always deeply connected to and often dependent on their agricultural neighbors. Few of these peoples could live solely from the products of their animals, and most of them actively sought access to the foodstuffs, manufactured goods, and luxury items available from the urban workshops and farming communities of nearby civilizations. Particularly among the pastoral peoples of Inner Eurasia, this desire for the fruits of civilization periodically stimulated the creation of tribal confederations or states that could more effectively deal with the powerful agricultural societies on their borders. The Mongol Empire of the 13th century was but the most recent and largest in a long line of such efforts dating back to the first millennium BCE. Constructing a large state among pastoralists was no easy task. Such societies generally lacked the surplus wealth needed to pay for the professional armies and bureaucracies that everywhere sustained the states and empires of agricultural civilizations. And the fierce independence of widely dispersed pastoral clans and tribes, as well as their internal rivalries, made any enduring political unity difficult to achieve. Nonetheless, charismatic leaders such as Chinggis Khan were periodically able to weld together a series of tribal alliances that for a time became powerful states. In doing so, they often employed the device of fictive kinship, designating allies as blood relatives and treating them with a corresponding respect. Despite their limited populations, such states had certain military advantages in confronting larger and more densely populated civilizations. They could draw on the horseback riding and hunting skills of virtually the entire male population, and some women as well. Easily transferred to the role of warrior, these skills, which were practiced from early childhood, were an integral part of Inner Eurasian pastoral life. But what sustained these states was their ability to extract wealth through raiding, trading, or extortion from agricultural civilizations such as China, Persia, and Byzantium. As long as that wealth flowed into pastoral states, rulers could maintain the fragile alliances among fractious clans and tribes. When it was interrupted, however, those states often fragmented. Pastoralists interacted with their agricultural neighbors not only economically and militarily, but also culturally, as they became acquainted with and tried on for size all the world and universal religions. At one time or another, Judaism, Buddhism, Islam, and several forms of Christianity all found a home somewhere among the pastoral peoples of Inner Eurasia. So did Manichaeism, a religious tradition born in 3rd century Persia and combining elements of Zoroastrian, Christian, and Buddhist practice. Usually conversion was a top-down process, as pastoral elites and rulers adopted a foreign religion for political purposes, sometimes changing religious allegiance as circumstances altered. Pastoral peoples, in short, did not inhabit a world totally apart from their agricultural and civilized neighbors. Surely the most fundamental contribution of pastoralists to the larger human story was their mastery of environments unsuitable for agriculture. Through the creative use of their animals, they brought a version of the food-producing revolution and a substantial human presence to the arid grasslands and desert regions of Afro-Eurasia. As the pastoral peoples of Inner Asian steppes learned the art of horseback riding, by roughly 1000 BCE, their societies changed dramatically. Now they could accumulate and tend large herds of horses, sheep, and goats, and move more rapidly over a much wider territory. New technologies invented or adapted by pastoral societies added to the mastery of their environment and spread widely across the Eurasian steppes, creating something of a common culture in this vast region. These innovations included complex horse harnesses, saddles with iron stirrups, a small compound bow that could be fired from horseback, various forms of armor, and new kinds of swords. Agricultural peoples were amazed at the centrality of the horse in pastoral life. As a Roman historian noted about the Huns, from their horses, by day and night, every one of that nation buys and sells, eats and drinks, and bowed over the narrow neck of the animal, relaxes in a sleep so deep as to be accompanied by many dreams. Before the Mongols, pastoralists in history. What enabled pastoral peoples to make their most visible entry onto the stage of world history was the military potential of horseback riding and of camel riding somewhat later. Their mastery of mounted warfare made possible a long but intermittent series of pastoral empires across the steppes of Inner Eurasia and parts of Africa. For 2,000 years, those states played a major role in Afro-Eurasian history and represented a standing challenge to and an influence upon the agrarian civilizations on their borders. One large-scale pastoral empire was associated with the people known as the Xiongnu, who lived in the Mongolian steppes north of China. Provoked by Chinese penetration of their territory, the Xiongnu in the 3rd and 2nd centuries BCE created a huge military confederacy that stretched from Manchuria deep into Central Asia. Under the charismatic leadership of WotW, the Xiongnu Empire effected a revolution in pastoral life. Earlier fragmented and egalitarian societies were now transformed into a far more centralized and hierarchical political system in which power was concentrated in a divinely sanctioned ruler, and differences between junior and senior clans became more prominent. All the people who draw the bow have now become one family, declared WotW. Tribute exacted from other pastoral peoples and from China itself sustained the Xiongnu Empire and forced the Han Dynasty Emperor Wen to acknowledge unhappily the equality of people he regarded as barbarians. Our two great nations, he declared, no doubt reluctantly, the Han and the Xiongnu stand side by side. Although it subsequently disintegrated under sustained Chinese counterattacks, the Xiongnu Empire created a model that later Turkic and Mongol empires emulated. Even without a powerful state, various nomadic or semi-nomadic peoples played a role in the collapse of the already weakened Chinese and Roman empires, and in the subsequent rebuilding of those civilizations. It was during the era of third-wave civilizations that pastoral peoples made their most significant mark on the larger canvas of world history. Arabs, Berbers, Turks, and Mongols, all of them of pastoral origin, created the largest and most influential empires of that millennium. The most expansive religious tradition of the era, Islam, derived from a largely pastoral people, the Arabs, and was carried to new regions by another pastoral people, the Turks. In that millennium, most of the great civilizations of Outer Eurasia, Byzantium, Persia, India, and China, had come under the control of previously pastoral people, at least for a time. But as pastoralists entered and shaped the arena of world history, they too were transformed by the experience. The first and most dramatic of these incursions came from Arabs. In the Arabian Peninsula, the development of a reliable camel saddle somewhere between 500 and 100 BCE enabled pastoral Bedouin, desert-dwelling Arabs to fight effectively from atop their enormous beasts. With this new military advantage, they came to control the rich trade routes and incense running through Arabia. Even more important, these camel pastoralists served as the shock troops of Islamic expansion, providing many of the new religion's earliest followers and much of the military force that carved out the Arab Empire. Although intellectual and political leadership came from urban merchants and settled farming communities, the Arab Empire was in some respects a pastoralist creation that subsequently became the foundation of a new and distinctive civilization. Even as the pastoral Arabs encroached on the world of Eurasian civilizations from the south, Turkic-speaking pastoralists were making inroads from the north. Never a single people, various Turkic-speaking clans and tribes migrated from their homeland in Mongolia and southern Siberia, generally westward, and entered the historical record as creators of a series of empires between 552 and 965 CE, most of them lasting little more than a century. Like the Xiongnu Empire, there were fragile alliances of various tribes headed by a supreme ruler known as a Khagan, who was supported by a faithful corps of soldiers called wolves. For the wolf was the mythical ancestor of the Turkic peoples. From their base in the steppes, these Turkic states confronted the great civilizations to their south, China, Persia, Byzantium, alternately raiding them, allying with them against common enemies, trading with them, and extorting tribute payments from them. Turkic language and culture spread widely over much of Inner Asia, and elements of that culture entered the agrarian civilizations. In the courts of northern China, for example, yogurt thinned with water, a drink derived from the Turks, replaced for a time the traditional beverage of tea, and at least one Chinese poet wrote joyfully about the delights of snowy evenings in a felt tent. A major turning point in the history of the Turks occurred with their conversion to Islam between the 10th and 14th centuries. This extended process represented a major expansion of the faith and launched the Turks into a new role as the third major carrier of Islam, following the Arabs and the Persians. It also brought the Turks into an increasingly important position within the heartland of an established Islamic civilization as they migrated southward into the Middle East. There they served first as slave soldiers within the Abbasid Caliphate, and then as the Caliphate declined, they increasingly took political and military power themselves. In the Seljuk Turkic Empire of the 11th and 12th centuries, centered in Persia and present-day Iraq, Turkic rulers began to claim the Muslim title of Sultan rather than the Turkic Khagan. Although the Abbasid Caliph remained the formal ruler, real power was exercised by Turkic sultans. Not only did Turkic peoples become Muslims themselves, but they carried Islam to new areas as well. Their invasions of northern India solidly planted Islam in that ancient civilization. In Anatolia, formerly ruled by Christian Byzantium, they brought both Islam and a massive infusion of Turkic culture, language, and people, even as they created the Ottoman Empire, which by 1500 became one of the great powers of Eurasia. In both places, Turkic dynasties governed and would continue to do so well into the modern era. Thus, Turkic people, many of them at least, had transformed themselves from pastoralists to sedentary farmers, from creators of steppe empires to rulers of agrarian civilizations, and from polytheistic worshippers of their ancestors and various gods to followers and carriers of a monotheistic Islam. Broadly similar patterns prevailed in Africa as well. All across northern Africa and the Sahara, the introduction of the camel, probably during the first millennium BCE, gave rise to pastoral societies. Much like the Turkic-speaking pastoralists of Central Asia, much of these peoples later adopted Islam, but at least initially had little formal instruction in the religion. In the 11th century CE, a reform movement arose among the Sandhaja Berber pastoralists living in the Western Sahara. They had only recently converted to Islam and were practicing it rather superficially. The movement was sparked by a scholar, Ibn Yasin, who returned from a pilgrimage to Mecca around 1039, seeking to purify the practice of the faith among his own people in line with orthodox principles. That religious movement soon became an expansive state, the Almoravid Empire, which incorporated a large part of southwestern Africa, and in 1086 crossed into southern Spain, where it offered vigorous opposition to Christian efforts to conquer the region. For a time, the Almoravid state enjoyed considerable prosperity based on its control of much of the West African gold trade and the grain-producing Atlantic plains of Morocco. The Almoravids also brought to Morocco the sophisticated Islamic culture of southern Spain, still visible in the splendid architecture of the city of Marrakesh, for a time the capital of the Almoravid Empire. By the mid-12th century, that empire had been overrun by its longtime enemies, Berber farming people from the Atlas Mountains. But for roughly a century, the Almoravid movement represented an African pastoral people who had converted to Islam, came into conflict with their agricultural neighbors, built a short-lived empire, and had a considerable impact on neighboring civilizations in both North Africa and Europe.